In order to protect your systems, you need to know a little bit about networking and some of the protocols therein. Stay tuned to find out more.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello everyone, here we are again, back with Daniel, and we're going to be talking about networking and protocols. Well, when I say we, it's actually going to be Daniel, not so much me. A little bit of me, I guess. So we have our general network, and then we have protocols therein, but that's plural, which means we have multiple ones. What's the first one we're going to take a look at?
Okay, well, let's start with some of the protocol stacks. Well, when I say some of, the two protocol stacks that you would probably encounter out there in the wild, because they are the standards of which we typically work off of. The first one being the OSI model, which is hopefully you are familiar with at this point. Hopefully right now is basically a review for you. And we're just going to remind ourselves of what that looks like. I've made a quick slide just to give us that friendly reminder of, oh yes, there it is, the OSI model. Oh man, does it bring back wonderful memories, right? The acronyms, the hours of coffee and sleepless nights trying to memorize this thing and all the different protocols that go along therein. But for right now, we just want to remind ourselves of the basics of it, that we're going from bottom to top. So 1 will be at the bottom, 7 will be at the top. It's a 7-layer protocol, and it gives us the ability to standardize how we operate through a networked system. Fair enough? Fair enough. Let's start. Oh, do you want to start at the top or you want to start at the bottom? Justin will let the dealer's choice that.
Let's start at the bottom. I feel pretty confident about the top, so this is me going. I need to learn the bottom first.
All right, well, let's start at the bottom, which would be layer 1, right? So really quickly, that's the physical layer. This is anything that works with ones and zeros, bits and bytes, electrical signal, right? This will be your network interface card. This will be your cabling medium, the connector, right? These are the instruments that we typically are dealing with at this level, right? Because it's just sending information over a wire. Doesn't care what that information is. Doesn't really have a whole lot of logic to it, if any at all. We call this like the dumbest layer because it just doesn't do a whole lot other than send that stuff, right? Then we work ourselves up to the data link layer, the second layer. This does start concerning itself a little more with logic and reason because it starts understanding things like MAC addresses and logical link controllers, right? So this will be layer 2. A lot actually happens at layer 2. And unless you're trying to get out of your own network and cross a network boundary, you're probably going to do most of your connectivity right there as far as having that connection. Who is what and where are they kind of thing. Once you need to cross those boundaries, now we're starting to talk about the network layer and the transport layer, right? And a lot of times we'll see these guys start to kind of talking about each other very symbiotically, right? Because with the network layer, I'm very concerned with like the protocols that are going to allow those connections to occur. Right, this will be TCP, UDP. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. And then in the transport layer, how do I get that across, right? And this will be our actual like IP is happening there. Then we move up into the session. How do I create a session and make that connection established, keep it established, and then break it down once we're done with our conversation as far as the network goes? That's at the session layer. Presentation. I've gotten data across the session. How should I show it to the end user? How should I format that so that it's intelligible by the end user? We'll see that at the presentation layer. And then, of course, application. What application am I using? So this will be things like, maybe I'm using SSH. That's an application, right? It's something I can interface with as an end user, send commands, receive commands, data, so on and so forth. I'm interfacing with the network itself using the application layer. So there you go. That's the OSI model. Again, hopefully that was a refresher for you. If not, there's plenty of resources, especially here at IT Pro TV. Go watch some of our network stuff. It will definitely give you a much deeper sense of what's going on at each one of these layers and give you a further understanding. But at this point, this should be some assumed knowledge. Now let's move on to the, let me close this slide. I'll open another one, which is the TCP model. Is basically kind of the same thing, except being a 7-layer model, it's a 5-layer model, right? We have some similar naming conventions going on, like application, but here application takes up the first, I think, 3 layers. And then transport is taking up that's IP and transport layer, right? So I'm sorry, transport and TCP, or the network layer is taking up multiple layers of the IP. It's just which one do you want to use? Which standard and convention do you want to stick to? Just be familiar with these layers as far as the TCP model, which I thought was a 5-layer, but I guess it's a 4-layer. Justin's going to fact check me on that one. My mind is telling me it was a 5-layer model, but
I was going to ask you about it because you were like, it's a 5-layer. I was like,
yeah.
Daniel, I hate to be the bearer of bad news,
my
but
brain always tells me.
1, 2, 3.
That's how counting works. I can count a potato. But the last layer is the network interface layer. I think this takes up the data link layer and the physical layer. So those get bundled up. Justin, any word on the fact check when it comes to TCP modeling?
You know, now that we've talked about that, I think there's some. So I think there's a 4-layer version, and I think
there is also a 5-layer.
I think there's also
that breaks apart one of these layers here.
Yeah, I'm trying to find that real quick.
Yeah. Don't be. We're not trying to scare you.
Ultimately, it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. It's just how do you wish to differentiate them? At the end of the day, I just want you to be familiarized with those models. Almost invariably, has been my experience to work with the OSI than it is with the TCP. So,
I could be wrong about this, but I think the network interface layer is broken up into 2 layers: data link and physical.
There you go. Yes.
For the 5-layer model.
There you go. So there you go. Okay. So now we have it.
Same thing,
folks.
Same thing.
Troubleshooting right out of the gate. But those are like I said, the protocol stacks that you're probably going to want to be familiar with. Just that the OSI is going to be your bread and butter. TCP is also ran, but is gaining some popularity, I think. So protocol stacks, hopefully we're squared away.
Now, within each one of those stacks, I know for me, I have to interface with a few different ones. Like I use HTTP, but those are actual protocols, not necessarily this combination of models.
Yeah.
So we got several protocols to talk about, right?
Well, really, the list is so long and extensive. There's no way we could talk about every protocol that you should be minorly familiar with. So I just grabbed a handful that I thought were probably the most important. And that's relative as well. This is very subjective when it comes to...
I guess the most common that you would encounter?
Okay, we'll go with that. I like that. Most common that you could deal with. So we label them common protocols that you need to be familiar with. So let's start off with TCP itself. This is what we call a connection-oriented protocol. What that means is it actually cares whether the data you gets sent, is received correctly, and you're happy with it, right? So it does a few things to make sure that this occurs. It actually performs a handshaking function to make sure that a connection is created. And then, of course, it does some like checking and stuff to verify that everything was received. If anything wasn't, it will retransmit that stuff based off of the conversation that's happening between the client and the server. But we can see certain things. If I fire up Wireshark, let's go into Kali here. I want to get Wireshark going, sniffing and spoofing, and then Wireshark. And once Wireshark is running, we can actually look at a TCP connection and see that 3-way handshake that occurs when a TCP connection is created. So I'll go to ETH0. Looks like we are capturing, great. And I'll just run a very quick Nmap scan. So we'll Nmap-ST because I want to do a full connection scan. By default, it doesn't do a full connect scan. And I will do, let's see here, -P, I'll just pick a port that I know is open, that we can get that connection. And that's going to be against 10, 10, 10. Oh, you know what I want to do? This is on a local network, so I'm going to do send IP. Oh, it actually uses the IP protocol and not just ARP. And then that's 10, 10, 10, 130. And I think that's all we need. So let's send that out there. It should be now scanning that system and making a full connection to get that information. Once it's done, we should be able to jump back into Wireshark and say, oh, there is that connection handshake. All right, so it's done. Go to Wireshark. We'll stop the capture. And now we'll just start looking for TCP. So here's some TCP right here. And I'm going to follow the TCP stream. And you can see nothing's really going on, but I can filter it down. I don't have all of it there. I know this is super tiny, right? So I'm seeing like this SYN and this reset. So that's only one side of the conversation. I'm gonna remove that filter. let's get back in there and let's find, so you can see protocol, right? We're seeing things like DNS and ICMP, also very important parts of the show here. But I'm only seeing these 2 TCP. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. And in the proper order. All right, so these 3, let's just filter that. And we will follow that TCP stream. And now I close this. We should just be able to see this, which is exactly what I want to show you. So it starts off with a SYN packet. So it's saying, hey, I want to start a conversation. If the client responds correctly, it should send a SYN-ACK. Excellent, that's exactly what I should see. And then below, also another acknowledgement from the originator saying, okay, let's do this. Let's make that connection. If all 3 of those things are there, your 3-way handshake is complete, and now you are set up to have a full TCP connection. It can perform its duties. You also see this RST, which is a reset. That's just Nmap saying, hey, thanks for making a connection with me, but we're done. So I'm gonna kill this. So thanks so much for playing. But very simple, and we're actually able to see that using something like a protocol analyzer, which is what Wireshark is. Great stuff. We're also seeing IP in here because, hey, look, there's the IP address right there. Concerns itself with addressing and being able to cross boundaries, network boundaries. So if I needed to get out of this place into a different network, IP is very important for us. So moving on, you also see TCP and IP very closely related as well. Moving on, UDP is the I guess we'll say brother or sister of TCP. It is also a connection protocol, but it is connectionless. It doesn't worry about connections itself. I wonder if we captured any UDP. Look in here. I don't see any. DNS, no UDP happening. That's okay. It's not, just depending on what you're running, you could see UDP, you might not. It's no big deal. But what UDP does is say, hey, are you open for a connection? The client responds, yeah, this port is open. Great. Once that originator realizes that there is an open port, it can just start sending information. But it doesn't worry about whether or not it gets there. It doesn't check if it got an order, anything, nothing about that. It just says, here comes the flood of info. Good luck. And it starts sending it on its way. Doesn't worry about that connection whatsoever. So that's UDP. We use this a lot with things like VoIP or streaming, any kind of streaming, because we don't want to be, it would create a lot of latency and lag for things like real-time voice or video. So instead, we just spray and pray, and hopefully most of the packets show up in the order that they're supposed to, which is why you see artifacts and hear weird things when you use those types of applications, because they are depending on UDP. So keep that in mind as you work through these systems.
UDP is one of those where I've built systems where we just lean on UDP because it's fast. And we can afford if, hey, this little packet didn't get there. Whatever, who cares? But you do have to be careful, because if you turn it on real high, your network will grind to a halt. So I've heard.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Raise your hand if you're guilty of that, Justin. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
I was like, that's cool. Hey, I can't get to the internet.
Yeah, that seems broken. Did I do that?
Yeah, because you can just broadcast like crazy.
Yeah.
And it's great for distributed systems because everybody's just listening for certain things.
Yep.
But it's a lot of bandwidth if you really turn it up.
Yeah. And it doesn't care. It says, okay, I'll just take what you give me. So there's TCP, UDP. We also threw in IP for good measure. Let's move on down the line. Let's talk about DHCP, the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. This is how we get our IP addresses through an automated service instead of us having to walk around to every device and go, your IP is this. Oh, what do you mean I typed it in wrong? Oh, all right. So it saves us a lot of headache and time as far as administrative effort goes. So we love DHCP. And even with things that require to have the same IP address, regardless of when it is on, it always needs that IP. Something like we would typically use static. We could still lean on DHCP instead of reservation. Say when it reaches out to DHCP, make sure it gets this IP based off of this MAC address, which is its NIC card, right? I want to say NIC card. So bad. It's redundant, right? Network interface card. Stupid.
That's from the Department of Redundancy Department.
That's right. Love it. But we can show you that response as well. Again, we're going to lean on Wireshark to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new capture and continue without saving there. And I'm actually going to just jump networks here over to the wireless and IT Pro TV. So I'm going to connect to IT Pro TV's wireless, which should initiate, hey, I need an IP address. And we'll see what's called the DORA process. And the DORA process is how IP addresses are doled out by DHCP. All right, so give me that Wireshark. Let's stop that capture because now we're on a network with a lot of activity. But we'll just look by protocol. So we see, there we go. And there is the DHCP. So we see this discover, offer, request, and acknowledgement. That is DORA, D-O-R-A. So it's saying, hey, I'm looking for DHCP out there. And then any DHCP servers go, I've got that if you'd like it. Okay, cool. Here's an IP. Would you like it? I acknowledge that I'll take that IP address, and you're done. And now you have an IP. Done all automatically right here. So understanding that DORA process can help you in troubleshooting, or if there's like a rogue DHCP server on your network, could be helpful in finding that kind of thing. Starting to look through those packets, look at DHCP and what's going on, could discover some craziness going on, especially if people are like, I'm having trouble connecting to something. Maybe that could be a troubleshooting method for you. So there's DHCP. Justin, we're going to move into HTTP, which I know you love because that's your moneymaker.
That's my main protocol. Yeah. I mean, unless I'm in SOAP land.
Unless you're in SOAP.
I'm glad we're not talking about that. You'll notice that's not there. Hey, you might find it from time to time, but don't worry about it. But yeah, HTTP or HTTPS, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and that is built on top of TCP/IP, if I'm not mistaken. And that's usually what's initiating web traffic, right? I'm requesting from a server, I'm getting a response, and I always have that back and forth kind of conversation. If you ever go, well, what's going on? Those timeouts, imagine if I walked up to Daniel and was like, what's up, Daniel? And he just stared at me. That's
as I do.
That's a timeout.
As I do.
Right?
Yeah.
That's a timeout.
Yeah.
The difference between HTTP and HTTPS, encrypted versus unencrypted, right? We have valid certificate using TLS to encrypt that connection from end to end. I build applications using HTTP. It's very common. It's what makes the web work. Fun times.
That's right.
I have built distributed systems. Sometimes that's not the greatest because you do have that handshake that can increase latency. It's great to make sure things get there, but the TCP handshake, you're like, this is slow. So let's get on with it.
The UDP hammer down.
Yeah, I'm like, turn it up to 11.
Wick up.
Yeah, oh, that is down.
Yeah,
we took it down. But just need to be aware of HTTP in the context of the web.
Yeah, and the methods that they use, like the put and the gets, very common methods that you'll use. So if I want to send data to an HTTP service, I'll use put. Or if I want to just send get requests, hey, send me back something, get requests are very, very common. So having a basic understanding of those protocols and how it works can give you a very good idea of anything that's going wrong. You can kind of troubleshoot that.
And if you're snooping traffic and you're seeing like usernames and passwords and stuff, you should get really nervous, really, really nervous, because HTTP typically is just, it's a text-based serialization format. I'm sending it over using text. If it's not encrypted, oh well, everybody's going to see it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Always use encryption wherever you can. That is an important takeaway from any of these episodes. If you can employ some form of obfuscation or encryption, you should be doing that because it's good security. A couple others, just really quickly. ARP, the Address Resolution Protocol, it's basically maps MAC to IP so that you can very easily access those things, and your computers keep a table of those items so it can understand where that's going on. And then DNS, kind of the same thing, except it does hostname to IP, so it makes it a whole lot easier for us to type in itpro.tv than 129.23, what's the IP? I don't know, right? IPs aren't really great for human brains, so DNS is a wonderful service for us to help translate those things for us. We can easily remember things like itpro.tv, put that in our browser, and get to it. So DNS can be super helpful in those things. We're just out of time. Again, like I said, there is so many protocols. Or there are so many protocols that we could go through that are important or helpful, and depending on the context and the scenario, but we just don't have the time to be able to walk through that. If you do need to know more about that stuff, again, our networking stuff, so Cisco, we have all that available. Net Plus, even great material when it comes to understanding more in-depth a networked system. But there we go. There's networking and protocols for this show.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. And well, thank you for joining us. But as he said, we are out of time for this episode. So signing off for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Justin Dennison.
I'm Daniel Lowry.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.